Heinrich Kramer. Heinrich Kramer, a German inquisitor, was a controversial figure who is often considered the father of European witch hunts. In 1487, Kramer wrote Malleus Maleficarum, which means Hammer of Witches. The book became a comprehensive guide on how to identify, interrogate, and punish suspected witches. Malleus Maleficarum became a tool not only for the church, but also for many secular authorities who sought legal justification to crack down on witchcraft. Kramer asserts that women were more likely to become witches than men, a view that was deeply rooted in misogyny and contributed to the stigmatization of women in future witch hunts. The book contains cruel methods, including the use of torture to obtain confessions. Kramer devised evidence techniques such as the witch mark, which is a birthmark or scar believed to be evidence of a person's connection to the devil. He also developed the floating test, in which suspects were thrown into water. If they sank, they were presumed innocent, though often drowned, while if they floated, they were found guilty and sentenced to death. Malleus Maleficarum became one of the most popular books in Europe, published in 30 editions between 1487 and 1669. Its influence lasted for several centuries, informing court proceedings in many parts of Europe, including Germany, France, and Switzerland. The book eventually faced criticism from the Catholic Church itself for its extremity, but the damage was done. Thousands of people, mostly women, were executed on the basis of the teachings introduced by Kramer. Nicolas Remy. Nicolas Remy was a lawyer and judge from Lorraine, France, known for his persistence in leading the largest witch hunt in his region. Remy was instrumental in popularizing and developing witch hunting methods, noting that he was responsible for the execution of more than 900 people over a period of about 15 years. His most famous work, the 1595 De Monolatria Liberi Tres, meaning 3 books on the worship of Satan, contains guidelines and legal justifications for hunting down, torturing, and punishing witches. Remy strongly believed that witches were a serious threat to society and religion. He based most of his teachings on Heinrich Kramer's Malleus Maleficarum, but expanded his views, stating that demons could possess anyone, male or female. However, like many of her contemporaries, she focused primarily on women, who were considered more susceptible to demonic seduction. He documented his cases in gruesome detail, including the various methods of torture used to extract confessions from the accused. Remy's extreme views were also fueled by his belief that witches were responsible for the natural disasters, diseases, and poverty that plagued society. He used evidence such as witch marks and spectral evidence, visions of the devil, to support his belief in the guilt of the accused. His book became a handbook for French courts, reinforcing mass hysteria in Europe and worsening the fate of thousands. Although witch hunts began to die down by the end of his life, Remy's legacy remains strong, and he is remembered as one of the most brutal and ruthless figures in the history of witch hunts. King James VI of Scotland. King James VI of Scotland, who later became King James I of England, was a monarch famous for his obsession with witchcraft and witch hunting. His influence in witch hunting was immense, especially as he used his power to encourage the trial and conviction of suspected witches. His obsession began after his return trip from Denmark in 1590. Where his ships were struck by a violent storm. James believed that this storm was the result of witchcraft aimed at killing him, and this triggered a series of massive witch trials in Scotland known as the North Berwick Witch Trials. James's famous book, Demonology, published in 1597, goes into depth on how to identify and punish witches. The book not only outlined his belief that witches were a real threat, but also provided the court with guidelines on methods of examining suspected witches. In this book, James describes various rituals believed to be performed by witches, such as secret meetings with the devil and practices designed to corrupt society. Demonology became the basis for much of the witch hunting process in England and Scotland. When James became King of England in 1603, his influence on anti-witch policies expanded. He supported tougher laws against witches and helped shape society's view of witchcraft as a serious threat. Although later in life he became skeptical of witch hunts, the impact of his obsession was widespread, creating a fear that drove witch hunts for decades. Pierre de Lancre. Pierre de Lancre was a French magistrate known for his ruthless witch hunts in the Basque region of France. In 1609, King Henry IV appointed de Lancre to investigate alleged witchcraft in this region, which was believed to be a center of demonic activity. In this mission, de Lancre displayed extreme fanaticism, believing that the Basque region was inhabited by witches and devil worshippers who threatened the stability of the state and religion. De Lancre wrote Tableau de l'inconstance des mauvais anges et démons in 1612, which means painting of the uncertainty of evil angels and demons. The book contains various accounts of witches' secret encounters with demons, often flavored by his personal imagination and prejudices. He describes witches as people who attend Sabbat, or nightly meetings with the devil, where they perform dark rituals that challenge moral and religious values. According to Delancre, witches were even able to control the weather and cause crop failures and disasters. Under his leadership, more than 600 people were interrogated, tortured, and many were executed. Delancre often used brutal torture methods to force suspects to confess to witchcraft accusations, such as witch marks and spectral evidence. He also believed that women, especially younger ones, were particularly susceptible to demonic influence. Delancre's radical views sparked fear and created mass hysteria in the Basque region. Although his actions were criticized by some church figures and other authorities, he maintained his position as a defender of the purity of religion and society. To this day, Pierre Delancre is remembered as one of the most fanatical witch hunters in French history, and his work contributed to the spread of witch hunts in Europe. Matthew Hopkins, who referred to himself as the Witch Finder General, was one of the most notorious and ruthless witch hunters in English history, operating during the English Civil War in the eastern regions of England, particularly in Essex and Suffolk. Hopkins capitalized on the public's fear of witchcraft to enrich himself. Despite having no official authority, he managed to gain a great reputation as a witch hunter and charged high fees for his services, sparking great fear in the various villages he visited. Hopkins used cruel methods to test witches. One of the most famous methods was the floating test, in which suspects were thrown into water. If they sank, they were presumed innocent, although they often ended up drowning. But if they floated, they were presumed guilty and executed. In addition, he looked for witch marks such as scars, birthmarks, or spots suspected of being spots where demons sucked the blood of victims. At the height of his activities, Hopkins was responsible for the arrest and execution of around 300 people in less than 3 years, a huge number for England. Many of his victims were poor and elderly women living on the margins of society, and they were often tried with little or no concrete evidence. Hopkins's actions eventually led to widespread criticism, and some members of the public began to question the methods and legitimacy of his witch hunts. In 1647, after the public began to question his credibility, Hopkins died suddenly, most likely from tuberculosis. Hopkins's death marked the end of an era of massive witch hunts in England, but his violent legacy remains remembered as a symbol of evil and destructive mass hysteria. Cotton Mather. Cotton Mather was a Puritan minister and religious leader in Massachusetts who is best known for his role in the Salem witch trials from 1692 to 1693, one of America's most infamous witch hunts. Mather came from a prominent family in the Puritan community in Boston, and he had a great influence on colonial New England society, especially in terms of belief in witchcraft and demonology. As a minister and prolific author, Mather wrote many books and pamphlets emphasizing the dangers of witches and the importance of protecting society from demonic influence. In his book, Wonders of the Invisible World, 1693, Mather documented the Salem witch trials, providing theological and historical justification for the trial and punishment of those accused of being witches. Although he was not present in Salem himself, his writings provided moral and intellectual support for the trials that took place, even supporting the use of spectral evidence, testimonies of visions or apparitions of demonic spirits, in trials, even though such evidence was highly controversial and lacked credibility. Mather's influence reinforced the public's fear of witchcraft, and many saw him as one of the figures behind the wave of hysteria in Salem. However, as more and more innocent victims were executed, Mather began to doubt the use of spectral evidence, though without completely rejecting the trial. These doubts came too late to save the lives of those who had been condemned to death. After the Salem witch trials ended, Cotton Mather remained an important figure in Puritan society, although his role in the witch hunts caused controversy. His involvement in Salem is now remembered as an example of the dangers of mass hysteria and unfounded belief, as well as the influence of extreme religion on the law. His legacy is an important lesson in the fatal effects of excessive fear of the mystical or supernatural.